Welcome to the heart of the vast African savanna. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there stood a village unlike any other. This was no ordinary village. It was a sprawling settlement, with towering structures made of stone and clay that reached toward the sky. The Great Village, as it was known, was a beacon of power and prosperity, its people proud descendants of ancient warriors and skilled artisans. The village was ruled by a council of elders, wise men and women who had guided their people through countless seasons of abundance and drought. Among them was a chief strategist, a brilliant tactician whose mind was as sharp as the finest spear. His name was Kabiru, and he was revered throughout the village for his ability to outmaneuver any foe. Under his guidance, the great village had grown in strength, its warriors becoming the most feared in the region. But Kabiru's ambition knew no bounds. He envisioned a future where the great village would extend its dominion far beyond its borders, uniting the surrounding villages under one banner. These villages, though smaller and less formidable, were rich in resources, fertile lands, flowing rivers, and skilled craftsmen. To Kabiru, they were ripe for the taking. The council, swayed by Kabiru's vision, agreed to the plan. They would conquer the 10 surrounding villages, one by one, until the entire region was under their control. The people of the great village, confident in their strength and the wisdom of their leaders, eagerly supported the campaign. They believed that their expansion was not just a matter of power, but a divine mission to bring order and civilization to the land. And so, the warriors of the great village prepared for war. They sharpened their spears, mended their shields, and performed rituals to invoke the favor of the ancestors. The village's priests offered sacrifices to the gods, seeking blessings for the battles to come. The air was thick with anticipation, as the people awaited the dawn of a new era, a time of glory and conquest. The first village fell swiftly. The warriors of the great village descended upon it like a storm, their might overwhelming the defenders in a matter of hours. The villagers, caught off guard and outnumbered, had no choice but to surrender. The conquerors spared no one. Those who resisted were slain, while the rest were taken as captives. The spoils of war were brought back to the great village, and the people rejoiced, their confidence in Kabiru's plan growing stronger. One by one, the surrounding villages fell. The invaders were relentless, their tactics brutal yet effective. Each conquest brought more land, more resources, and more captives to the great village. The villagers who once lived in peace and harmony now trembled at the mere mention of the great village's name. They knew that resistance was futile, and many chose to flee their homes rather than face the wrath of the invaders. The day dawned with a blood-red sun rising over the horizon, casting an ominous glow across the vast savanna. The warriors of the great village, their armor gleaming in the early light, assembled at the gates of their home. The anticipation in the air was palpable. Today marked the beginning of their grand campaign to conquer the surrounding villages. Kabiru, the chief strategist, stood at the forefront of the assembled warriors. His eyes were sharp, and his mind focused on the task ahead. The first target was a village to the north, a modest settlement nestled beside a river. This village was known for its fertile land and abundant crops, resources that would greatly benefit the great village in its quest for dominance. As the warriors marched toward the village, their footsteps fell in unison, creating a rhythmic beat that echoed through the savanna. The sight of the advancing army was enough to send chills down the spines of those who saw it. The people of the great village were well aware of their own power, and they carried themselves with the confidence of victors. When they arrived at the outskirts of the first village, they were met with little resistance. The villagers, seeing the overwhelming force arrayed against them, were paralyzed by fear. They had heard of the great village's might, but had never imagined it would come to their doorstep. Kabiru gave the order to attack. The warriors surged forward with the ferocity of lions, their spears and shields clashing as they swept through the village. The defenders, few in number and poorly equipped, stood no chance. Within hours, the village was overrun. The crops were seized, the livestock rounded up, and the surviving villagers were taken as captives. The first victory came swiftly, and the spoils were bountiful. The warriors of the great village returned home with carts filled with grain, livestock, and other treasures. The people of the great village celebrated their triumph, confident that this was just the beginning of a long series of victories. Kabiru's plan was proceeding exactly as he had envisioned, but as the warriors feasted and sang songs of glory, a subtle change began to take root in their hearts. With each conquest, their confidence grew, but so did their arrogance. The ease with which they had taken the first village made them believe that all the other villages would fall just as quickly. The seeds of overconfidence were being sown, though none of them realized it yet. News of the first village's fall spread quickly across the region. The other villages, now aware of the threat posed by the great village, found themselves gripped by fear. They had heard stories of the great village's warriors, of their strength and ruthlessness, but those tales had always seemed distant, almost mythical. Now the danger was real, and it was closing in on them. The second and third villages fell in quick succession. The inhabitants, having heard of the fate of the first village, were demoralized even before the invaders arrived. Some villagers fled into the wilderness, hoping to escape the inevitable. Others chose to surrender without a fight, offering their lands and resources in exchange for their lives. The great village's warriors, emboldened by their successes, became increasingly confident. They began to see the surrounding villages as weak and unworthy opponents, mere obstacles to be swept aside in their march toward dominance. Each new conquest added to their growing sense of invincibility. As the great village's territory expanded, so did its wealth. The captured villages provided a steady stream of resources, crops, livestock, and even skilled labor. The people of the great village prospered as never before, and Kabiru's status as a master strategist was solidified. Yet, amid the growing prosperity, a sense of unease began to spread among the elders of the great village. They had seen empires rise and fall, and they knew that unchecked ambition often led to disaster. They voiced their concerns to Kabiru, cautioning him against overextending their reach. But Kabiru, now fully consumed by his vision of conquest, dismissed their warnings. The army was strong, the people were united, and the gods were on their side. What could possibly go wrong? As the campaign continued, several key characters began to emerge, each with their own motivations and internal struggles. Kabiru remained at the center of the story. Once a brilliant strategist who carefully weighed every decision, he now found himself increasingly driven by the desire to expand his legacy. The victories came so easily that he began to lose sight of the long-term consequences. His confidence was turning into hubris, and his once clear vision was clouded by the intoxicating allure of power. Nia, a skilled warrior and one of Kabiru's most trusted lieutenants, had been with him from the beginning. Fiercely loyal and highly competent, she led many of the successful assaults on the neighboring villages. But as the campaign dragged on, she began to question the morality of their actions. The sight of villagers fleeing in terror, the destruction of homes, and the taking of captives weighed heavily on her conscience. She had joined the army to protect her people, not to terrorize others. Nia's internal conflict grew with each conquest, and she found herself increasingly at odds with Kabiru's relentless ambition. Mzi, the wise elder of the final village, was a figure of quiet strength and deep wisdom. He had lived through countless seasons and had seen the rise and fall of many leaders. When he learned of the great village's campaign, he immediately recognized the threat they posed. But instead of succumbing to fear, Mzi began to prepare his people for what was to come. He understood that their only chance of survival lay in outsmarting the invaders, not in meeting them head-on in battle. His wisdom and strategic thinking would would play a crucial role in the events to come. The Oracle, a mysterious woman who lived deep within the sacred forest, was known for her cryptic prophecies. Many villagers, including Mzi, sought her counsel in times of need. The Oracle's visions were often difficult to interpret, but they held profound truths. As the great village's army drew closer, she foresaw the coming conflict and the possibility of a great downfall. Her prophecies would guide Mzi and the villagers in their fight for survival. With each new conquest, the great village grew richer and more powerful. The once modest village had transformed into a thriving metropolis, bustling with activity. New buildings were constructed, markets overflowed with goods, and the people enjoyed a standard of living that was unparalleled in the region. The warriors who returned from battle were hailed as heroes. They were showered with gifts, honored in ceremonies, and given positions of influence within the village. The spoils of war brought not only material wealth, but also a sense of pride and superiority among the people. They believed that their success was a sign of divine favor, that they were destined to rule over the entire region. Yet, beneath the surface, the cracks were beginning to show. The rapid expansion brought with it new challenges: governing the conquered villages, managing the influx of resources, and maintaining the loyalty of the warriors. The people of the great village were growing more accustomed to luxury, and with that came a sense of entitlement. The once strong bonds of unity were starting to fray as jealousy and greed took root. Kabiru, blinded by his success, failed to see the warning signs. He was focused solely on the next target, the next village to conquer. He believed that as long as they continued to expand, the problems would resolve themselves. But the more they conquered, the more complex the situation became. The spoils of war, which had once seemed like a blessing, were beginning to feel like a burden. The great village was teetering on the edge of something it had not anticipated, a downfall that would come not from an external enemy, but from within. The fourth village, known as Kijiji Kuama, was famed for its stone structures and fortified walls. Unlike the first village, which had been easily subdued, Kijiji Kuama presented a more significant challenge. Its people were proud and fiercely independent, and their village had withstood many challenges over the years. The walls were thick, built to last, and the villagers were well armed and prepared for any threat. Kabiru, having tasted victory with the first village, approached the conquest of Kijiji Kuama with a mixture of confidence and caution. He understood that brute force alone would not suffice. He needed to employ both strategy and psychological warfare to overcome the defenses of this fortified settlement. Before launching a direct assault, Kabiru employed tactics to weaken the resolve of Kijiji Kuama's defenders. His army began by cutting off the village's access to surrounding resources. Scouts were dispatched to block the trade routes and disrupt supply lines, ensuring that no food or reinforcements could reach the village. Kabiru also sent messengers to the village, offering terms of surrender. The messages were laced with threats, emphasizing the futility of resistance and the might of the great village. These messengers spoke of the destruction of the first village, hoping to instill fear and doubt among the villagers. The psychological pressure began to take its toll. Some villagers, particularly those who were older or less battle-hardened, started to question whether it was worth resisting. Whispers of surrender spread through the village, creating an undercurrent of fear that Kabiru hoped to exploit. Despite the psychological tactics, the leaders of Kijiji Kuama refused to surrender. The village elders, warriors who had defended the village for decades, were determined to fight. They reinforced the walls and prepared their defenses, readying themselves for the inevitable assault. Kabiru, recognizing that diplomacy had failed, ordered his warriors to begin the siege. The invaders brought with them powerful siege weapons, including battering rams and trebuchets, designed to breach the village's stone walls. These weapons had been crafted with the finest materials from the great village and were capable of inflicting significant damage. The siege began at dawn, with the invaders launching a relentless barrage of stones and flaming projectiles at the walls of Kijiji Kuama. The villagers fought back valiantly, using their own weapons and tactics to repel the attackers. They hurled rocks, shot arrows, and poured boiling oil from the battlements in an attempt to keep the invaders at bay. However, the siege weapons of the great village proved too powerful. After several days of intense bombardment, a section of the wall finally gave way. The collapse created a breach large enough for Kabiru's warriors to storm the village. With the wall breached, Kabiru ordered his warriors to charge. The invaders poured into the village, their numbers overwhelming the defenders. The fighting was fierce and brutal, with both sides sustaining heavy casualties. The warriors of Kijiji Kuama, though outnumbered, fought with unmatched ferocity, determined to protect their homes and families. Despite their bravery, the defenders were gradually pushed back. Kabiru's warriors, trained in close-quarters combat, used their superior numbers and equipment to gain the upper hand. The village's defenses, weakened by the prolonged siege, could not withstand the relentless assault. In the chaos of the battle, the village elders gathered their remaining warriors for a final stand in the village square. They knew that defeat was inevitable, but they were determined to make the invaders pay dearly for their victory. The final confrontation was a desperate and bloody affair, with neither side willing to yield. Kabiru, witnessing the tenacity of the defenders, ordered his warriors to show no mercy. He knew that allowing any survivors could lead to future uprisings. The invaders fought with brutal efficiency, cutting down the last of the defenders and securing the village. The conquest of Kijiji Kuama was complete, but the victory had come at a high cost. The village lay in ruins, its proud stone structures reduced to rubble. The surviving villagers, mostly women, children, and the elderly, were rounded up and taken as captives. Kabiru intended to use them as a warning to other villages, a living testament to the fate that awaited those who dared to resist the great village. The bodies of the fallen warriors were left where they lay, a grim reminder of the price of defiance. The once thriving village was now a ghostly ruin, its people subjugated and its spirit broken. Kabiru's army, though victorious, was not unscathed. The battle had drained them, and they needed time to regroup before moving on to the next village. Kabiru, ever the strategist, began planning his next move. He knew that each conquest would grow more difficult as the remaining villages learned of the fate of Kijiji Kuama. He would need to adapt his tactics and prepare for even greater challenges ahead. The fall of Kijiji Kuama sent shockwaves through the surrounding villages. The news of the village's destruction and the ruthless tactics employed by Kabiru spread quickly. Fear gripped the hearts of those who had hoped to resist, and many began to reconsider their plans. However, the legacy of Kijiji Kuama was not one of complete defeat. The courage and determination of its defenders inspired others to fight for their homes. The story of their last stand became a symbol of resistance, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the spirit of a people could not be easily crushed. Kabiru's conquest of the second village was a ruthless demonstration of power, but it also sowed the seeds of future rebellion. As he prepared to move on to the next village, Kabiru knew that his campaign was far from over. The path to total domination would be paved with blood, sacrifice, and the unyielding will of those who refused to surrender their freedom. The fifth village on Kabiru's path was known as Dodo, a name that meant dream in the local language. Unlike the fortified Kijiji Kuama, Dodo was an idyllic settlement nestled in a lush valley, famous for its fertile lands and thriving agriculture. The people of Dodo were peaceful farmers, deeply connected to the land and the spirits they believed watched over it. Their village, though lacking in physical defenses, had a reputation for being blessed with good fortune, and its people were known for their cunning and resourcefulness. Kabiru, fresh from the bloody conquest of Kijiji Kuama, expected Dodo to fall easily under the might of his army. However, he was wary of underestimating them, knowing that each village posed its unique challenges. He dispatched scouts to gather intelligence on Dodo's layout, resources, and potential weaknesses, determined to crush any resistance before it could take root. As Kabiru's warriors approached Dodo, they found the village seemingly unprepared for an invasion. The fields were full of crops. The villagers went about their daily tasks with apparent indifference, and there were no visible signs of fortifications or armed resistance. It appeared as though the people of Dodo were either unaware of the approaching threat or were too naive to understand the danger they faced. This deceptive calm put Kabiru on edge. He had seen how overconfidence could lead to disaster, and he was not eager to repeat the mistakes of the past. Despite the lack of visible defenses, he ordered his warriors to proceed with caution, spreading them out to encircle the village and cut off any potential escape routes. The villagers watched the advancing army with quiet resolve, their faces betraying no fear or panic. This unnerved some of Kabiru's men, who began to whisper among themselves about the village's rumored connection to the spirits. Kabiru dismissed such talk as superstition, but he could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. As Kabiru's forces closed in on Dodo, they were met with an unexpected obstacle. The seemingly peaceful fields that surrounded the village were, in fact, riddled with hidden traps. The farmers of Dodo, though not warriors, had used their knowledge of the land to set up elaborate snares and pitfalls, designed to cripple the invaders before they could reach the village. The first sign of trouble came when one of Kabiru's scouts triggered a hidden pit, lined with sharp stakes. The warrior's scream echoed across the valley, sending a wave of unease through the ranks. Before they could react, more traps were sprung. Nets concealed under leaves snapped up, ensnaring warriors in their grasp, while concealed spikes shot out from the ground, impaling those who strayed too close. Chaos erupted as Kabiru's army found itself caught in a deadly web of traps. The villagers, having anticipated the invasion, launched their counterattack with precision. Farmers armed with slingshots, bows, and farm tools emerged from the fields and the tree-line, striking from a distance before retreating back into cover. The invaders, disoriented and unable to see their enemies, struggled to mount an effective defense. Kabiru, realizing that his forces were being outmaneuvered, ordered a retreat to regroup and reassess the situation. The ambush had cost him many warriors, and it was clear that Dodo would not be as easy to conquer as he had hoped. Frustrated but undeterred, Kabiru decided to lay siege to Dodo. He understood that the villagers relied heavily on their crops and water sources, so he aimed to cut off their access to both. His army established a perimeter around the village, blocking the roads and preventing anyone from entering or leaving. Kabiru's plan was to starve the village into submission. He believed that without food and water, the villagers would eventually be forced to surrender. To hasten the process, he ordered his warriors to destroy the fields and poison the streams that fed into the village, ensuring that no supplies could reach the inhabitants. The villagers, however, were prepared for such tactics. They had stored ample supplies of food and water within their homes, and had secretly dug wells and tunnels to access fresh water from underground sources. The people of Dodo were determined to outlast the siege, confident in their ability to survive on the resources they had carefully hoarded. Days turned into weeks as the siege dragged on, with neither side willing to give an inch. Kabiru grew increasingly impatient, his frustration mounting as his army struggled to maintain control over the surrounding area. His warriors, wearied by the long siege and demoralized by their inability to breach the village, began to lose their resolve. As the siege wore on, Kabiru realized that a change in strategy was needed. He decided to play a more psychological game, hoping to break the villagers' spirit through fear and intimidation. He ordered his warriors to set fire to the fields at night, hoping the sight of their burning crops would demoralize the villagers. But the villagers of Dodo were not so easily cowed. As the fires blazed in the distance, the village elder, an elderly woman named Nyota, gathered the villagers in the central square. With a voice full of conviction, she reminded them of the strength that came from unity and their deep connection to the land. The villagers, inspired by her words, stood firm, refusing to give in to fear. In a bold move, Nyota sent a messenger to Kabiru's camp under the cover of darkness. The messenger, a young girl carrying a simple basket, presented Kabiru with a gift of fresh bread and fruits. The message was clear. Despite the siege, Dodo remained strong and resilient, and their spirits could not be broken. Kabiru, taken aback by the gesture, realized that the villagers were far more resourceful and determined than he had anticipated. He knew that continuing the siege would only drain his army further, and he could not afford to let his forces be worn down by a prolonged stalemate. One by one, the surrounding villages fell. The invaders were relentless, their tactics brutal yet effective. Each conquest brought more land, more resources, and more captives to the great village. The villagers who once lived in peace and harmony now trembled at the mere mention of the great village's name. They knew that resistance was futile, and many chose to flee their homes rather than face the wrath of the invaders. But the final village was different. Located at the edge of the great village's expanding territory, this village was small and unassuming. It had little in the way of wealth or resources, and its people were few in number. Yet, it was this very village that would prove to be the undoing of Kabiru and his army. The final village, one of the elderly named Mzi, gathered the villagers around the central fire pit. The air was thick with anticipation as the elder spoke, his voice steady and reassuring. "Our time has come," Mzi began. "The great village is marching toward us, but we will not meet them with despair. We have our land, our wisdom, and each other. These will be our greatest weapons." Mzi had long been a respected figure in the village, known for his wisdom and fairness. His experience and calm demeanor had earned him the trust of every villager. He had always believed that the strength of a community lay not just in its numbers, but in its unity and resolve. This belief would prove crucial in the days to come. He had also sought the counsel of the Oracle, a mysterious woman who lived in the sacred forest. The Oracle was known for her cryptic prophecies and profound insights. When Mzi approached her, she had been deep in meditation, her eyes closed as she communed with the spirits of the land. The oracle's prophecy had been both foreboding and hopeful. "The storm will come," she had told Mzi, "but the storm itself shall be the harbinger of change. The small will become great, not through strength alone, but through the wisdom of the land and the courage of its people." Mzi took this prophecy to heart. He knew that the final village's strength lay not in its physical size or wealth, but in its ability to adapt and survive. The oracle's words guided his preparations and gave him the confidence to lead his people with purpose and clarity. The great village's army arrived on the morning of a scorching summer day. The sun blazed in the sky, casting a harsh light on the land. The warriors, confident in their ability to crush any opposition, advanced with a sense of superiority. They marched in tight formations, their banners fluttering in the breeze as they approached the final village. As they neared the outskirts of the village, the invaders were met with a strange silence. The village seemed deserted, its streets empty and still. Kabiru, sensing an opportunity for a quick victory, ordered his troops to advance into the village. The warriors moved cautiously, their eyes scanning for any signs of resistance. It was then that the first traps were triggered. Hidden pits opened beneath the feet of the invaders, sending them tumbling into dark, narrow holes. Cries of surprise and pain erupted as the warriors struggled to escape. The villagers, hidden in the forest and behind barricades, took advantage of the chaos to launch their surprise attacks. Arrows flew from concealed positions, striking down the invaders with deadly accuracy. The narrow pathways, designed to confuse and disorient, forced the warriors into smaller groups. The villagers, using their knowledge of the terrain, ambushed the invaders from multiple angles, exploiting every opportunity to strike. Kabiru quickly realized that something was wrong. The battle was not unfolding as he had anticipated. The village that he had considered an easy target was turning out to be a formidable opponent. The traps and ambushes were taking their toll on his forces, and the once unshakable confidence of his warriors was beginning to wane. The battle for the final village reached its climax as the great village's forces began to falter. The invaders, exhausted and demoralized, were struggling to maintain their offensive. The villagers, though weary, continued to fight with unyielding determination. Kabiru, observing the disarray among his troops, realized that the battle was slipping away from him. The final village, which he had underestimated, was proving to be a far more formidable opponent than he had imagined. His once clear strategy was unraveling, and his army was being pushed to its breaking point. The decisive moment came when Kabiru himself was unhorsed by a well-aimed spear from one of the village defenders. As he struggled to regain his footing, the realization of defeat began to sink in. The invaders, demoralized and leaderless, could no longer sustain their assault. The villagers, seizing the opportunity, launched a final coordinated push. They drove the remaining invaders back, their tactics and determination proving too much for the weary and disheartened army. The great village's forces were routed, their once formidable numbers reduced to a disorganized mob. In the aftermath of the battle, the great village's army was in disarray. The survivors fled, leaving behind their fallen comrades and the spoils of war. The final village, against all odds, had emerged victorious. The victory was not just a matter of survival, but a triumph of resilience and ingenuity over overwhelming force. The story of the great village's downfall serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of overconfidence and unchecked ambition. The invaders, once so sure of their dominance, were brought low by their own hubris. Their failure to recognize the strengths and resilience of their opponents led to their ultimate defeat. The story of the great village and the final village became a legend, passed down through generations as a tale of caution and inspiration. It reminded people of the importance of humility, wisdom, and the need to respect the strength and resilience of others. The legacy of the final village's victory lived on as a symbol of hope and perseverance. The lessons learned from the conflict continued to inspire new generations, encouraging them to approach challenges with courage, ingenuity, and respect for the land and its people. The end of this tale marks the conclusion of one chapter and the beginning of another. The great village's fall serves as a poignant reminder that true strength lies not in sheer power, but in the ability to adapt, unite, and respect the world around us. The final village's triumph was a victory for all who believe in the power of resilience and the strength of the human spirit.